Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. It's a rainy day here in Sacramento, California. Last night, I was able to watch the new WWE Network show. Believe it is called Untold. At first glimpse, the first episode of Untold was on the Hell in the Cell between Undertaker and Mick Foley. Honestly, they just did a Mick Foley stand-up act show 20 years later. I feel like the Hell in the Cell match has been talked about for almost every angle they could have talked about, but I just sort of skipped it. But I saw episode 2, which I believe aired last night after SmackDown, was about ECW's relaunch in 2006. I know that in the past, Bruce Pritchard covered the ECW relaunch on Something to Wrestle. I believe they even talked about it on the Something to Wrestle WWE Network show. But it honestly hasn't really been dived into a whole bunch, even on like WWE documentaries or anything that. Mostly for the fact that it's probably something WWE doesn't really want to look back upon. The ECW relaunch in 2006, even though the promotion ran for about 3 to 4 years, is really looked at as a massive fail. It ran one of its own ECW pay-per-views with December to Dismember, but really never really took off the way that Vince really thought it was going to. At first glimpse at WWE Untold, it looked like it was going to be the normal show with the talking heads popping up where they just clip things from this interview and clip things from that interview. It really started off with Paul Heyman talking about ECW's relaunch, and it took a minute, but I really noticed that they weren't showing the talking head of Paul Heyman. And then we heard from, Shane McMahon, we heard from the Sandman, we heard from Rob Van Dam, we heard from The Big Show. I started to notice that you weren't seeing the talking head, and some of them, like even when they interviewed Tommy Dreamer, it sounded like they called him on the phone and just were recording him talking on a speakerphone. It almost sounded a lot like it was a podcast where they actually just took clips of what they were talking about and were actually showing you what they were talking about. So it was almost like a visual podcast that you were watching. The show was honestly probably about 20 to 25 minutes. It was probably the average length of a normal show that you would watch on television. I personally thought that this was a really, really good show. I was a fan of ECW. I liked the fact that it was only a 1-hour television show. It was a lot like if your local independent wrestling show that it's in your area was able to get a small-time television deal and just showed 1 hour of wrestling each and every week. Off the top of my head, I think if I remember right, it was on Tuesdays. It was ran on Sci-Fi. Lots have been brought up, like the first few episodes of the ECW Zombie. You had like the Alien Macho Man, I think is what it was. Each and every week that this started off, it started off like a gimmick, where, the Sandman went out there and beat the hell out of somebody that you thought you would see on a Sci-Fi Network show. I thought that was really good. They brought up the fact that when ECW closed up, in 2001, Tommy Dreamer thought the company could still go on, but Paul Heyman no-showed the last meeting that the company had. There was people who had a lot of money invested in ECW and felt like there was a way, even though the deal was in bankruptcy, they could find a way for the company to still live on through syndication, and try to, gain that way back to getting back to the national, popularity of what ECW was. Paul Heyman no-showed the meeting because of the fact, I think, he had already signed a deal to go commentate for WWE. He was taking Jerry the King Lawler's spot. If you watch WrestleMania 17, it is done by Paul Heyman and Jim Ross. Honestly, in my opinion, I think I like Heyman and Ross more than I like Heyman and the King. And the Heyman and King were a duo on Monday Night Raw for so long that they have so many memories of them doing the show that they're a really good team. I just personally like Paul Heyman a lot. So, Heyman left. They sort of put the company in the ground, and Shane McMahon honestly thought by the One Night Stand pay-per-view that there was something that you could really tap into with the ECW name, and what Shane McMahon's thoughts were with relaunching ECW was it being a only online show that you could watch, where they could get away from the PG era. They could push the limits of what they were doing. I go back and forth. At first thought, I was like, if they were to launch a web-only ECW show, would I have watched back in 2006? And my first thought was like, yeah, I probably would have watched it. Honestly, I think that they were putting Velocity and Metal and those B shows like that on web only, some sort of matches like that, and I wasn't watching. ECW probably could have came back, and I probably wouldn't have noticed. But I think, honestly, if you would have sort of pushed the envelope by having really good matches, by really good wrestlers, and word of mouth got out that there was really good wrestling going on WWE.com under the ECW brand, I think probably people would have tuned in, even if it would have been like, if it was a streaming thing on WWE.com, you would probably have things sort of built up and on demand. And you might not just go and watch the show the day that it's going to be. Even Paul Heyman said it was, really futuristic thinking, because I think of what goes on with Netflix. Netflix uploads a show, boom, they put, 12 episodes up for a season, and, a lot of people will sit down and watch the whole thing, like Stranger Things right off the bat, just bam, 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 bam. Some people just watch an episode here, they watch an episode there. They don't really care if a show's on Tuesday nights. They're going to watch it when they want to watch it, how much they want to watch it, and they'll just get through it like that. And so that was a futuristic thing that Shane actually came up with. And then, as they pushed forward with the idea of ECW, Vince McMahon found out that there was a demand for a third brand of WWE, where television rights would come into play, and people would pay to be able to have ECW on their television. That's how they ended up on Sci-Fi. That's how ECW moved from Shane McMahon's hands onto Vince McMahon's, and Vince sort of took over. And even though Paul Heyman was there and Tommy Dreamer was there, two of the main members of ECW, Paul Heyman was able to say, hey, we're going to be able to relaunch this. It might be special for a little while, but within a year, this is going to be over. This is going to be done. I don't know when ECW launched, but honestly, the writing was on the wall by December, with the December to Dismember pay-per-view. It had the Hardys versus Eminem. It had the Elimination Chamber match. But even going into the pay-per-view, those were the only two matches that were named for the show. And the Hardys versus Eminem, they were a really good tag team, feud at the time. In the Elimination Chamber, they were not able to carry the ECW pay-per-view to be a success for WWE. Tommy Dreamer admits that he had tried to ask for his release twice before the show and was turned down. Paul Heyman said that he had tried to quit being the main writer of ECW twice before December to Dismember, and Stephanie McMahon wouldn't let him step away from the product. And, the December to Dismember pay-per-view came, and Vince and Paul Heyman had such different thoughts on what should happen on the show that Vince basically said that Heyman had to go. It wasn't move Heyman from ECW to SmackDown. He just needed to leave the company entirely. To where basically Heyman walked away from wrestling. He was away from it from a long time until around 2010, when there was rumors that Dixie Carter was trying to bring Paul Heyman in to run TNA. And that's sort of like when I think Heyman got back into WWE. I can't remember when he came in to be the spokesman for Brock. I guess that would have to be like 2012 after WrestleMania 28. And then, of course, he would be there for Punk and Cesaro and a couple of other names along the way. But ECW was a good thing. I really liked the show. I liked Untold. I was a fan of ECW. Somehow I found a way to watch most of the episodes, and some of the stuff was gimmicky and it was bad, but I liked the way that they talked about the fact that it would be a third brand. They would be able to bring back the ECW originals, and, within time, they would be able to bring in, new superstars from the developmental ECWs where Kofi Kingston, Sheamus, The Miz, and Morrison all really got traction on their careers and started getting things going. I don't think Sheamus would have won the WWE Championship back in 2010 if he wouldn't have had the feud in ECW with Goldust. And that was another thing. They thought of that there was people that were on Monday Night Raw as well as on SmackDown that were not being used, that still had a name in wrestling, even if their career was on the downward turn. They could, sort of put them on ECW to lend, their name and be able to have good matches. Mark Henry, Matt Hardy, Shane Helms, Goldust, are all sort of guys, that were, sort of put there. I don't think, Kurt Angle, I think, really fit ECW. It made sense. Big Show didn't make a lot of sense. And Big Show winning the ECW championship was a lot of the reasons why a lot of people walked away from the company. Well, not the company, but walked away from ECW and said, I tap out. This is not what I thought it was going to be. And a lot of people don't really point the finger at Rob Van Dam and Sabu getting pulled over, I believe, in Cleveland, and getting charged with, smoking pot, which was a violation of the wellness agreement at that time, to where Vince McMahon made Rob Van Dam drop the ECW title as well as the WWE Championship within the same week. Big Show was the winner of the ECW title. I believe Edge was the winner of the WWE Championship, and RVD had to go away because Big Show won the championship. They had to sort of give him a little bit of a run. There wasn't really an ECW original. We don't really know what the plans were with Rob Van Dam after he, cashed in and won the WWE Championship from John Cena. I believe he was just awarded and just given the ECW title. I don't think he beat anybody for it, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember. But, that's one of the reasons why the company had the turn that it did. Vince, I don't think, ever really had belief in Rob Van Dam. He didn't want to really put the really big push behind him after that arrest. I don't think if he lost trust or something like that, but he never really got that push again, to become champion. So that's WWE's Untold ECW story. Hopefully you guys can go check this out. It's almost going to be twice as long as this video. If you made it through this, you can make it through that. I'm even thinking I'm going to give that Mick Foley and Undertaker show a shot, because I think it might actually be something I might never have seen before. But more than likely, that Hell in a Cell has been covered to death. I really don't know what they could talk about that's untold.